My name is Richard. I'm 76 years old. I have lived almost all my life here in Davenport, Iowa, and until recently I thought I had faced every form of pain a man could endure. But nothing prepared me for the day my own son chose to celebrate a party while I buried his mother. Have you ever felt that someone you raised with all the love in the world just turned your back like you're a stranger? Have you ever wondered how it is possible for a child to forget who taught him to walk, to talk, to love? Well, I lived it, and it wasn't with strangers. It was with my only son, with the boy who slept on my chest when he was a baby, with the boy I buried along with my hope on that cold November day. If you think you've seen it all, wait until you hear what happened next, because when I thought the pain was gone, he showed up, with an order, as if nothing had happened. And that's where this story really begins, because that morning I realized that sometimes love needs to end for justice to finally be born. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. The day after my wife's funeral, while her cup was still on the counter and the smell of breakfast she never had hung in the kitchen, my phone rang. It was my son, not to ask how I was, not to say that he was sorry for not going to the funeral. He called to ask me for money, as if nothing had happened, as if burying his mother was just another ordinary Tuesday. At that moment, with his voice on the other end of the line, I understood that what was to come would be much greater than the grief. It would be the hardest choice of my life, to continue feeding in gratitude, or do something that, until then, I had never done. If this story has reached you and in some way touches a sensitive point inside, I invite you to stay with me. And if you feel that what you are hearing deserves to be remembered, support me with your application or a simple like. It's not by number, nor by vanity. It's just that counting it isn't easy, and knowing that someone listens, it gives me the strength to continue. That morning, the cold seemed to have entered not only through the cracks in the house, but inside me as well. Frost covered the backyard lawn, and the sun could barely pierce the fog that covered the living room windows. I was already wearing a suit, white shirt, dark jacket, black tie. Her hands trembled, and it wasn't because of the weather, it was inside. It's been a long time since I dressed for such an important moment, and so painful. The coffee I prepared was getting cold in her cup, the same as always, that light blue one with the worn edges. Eleanor's lipstick still lightly marked the edge. The cup stayed there. Stop, as if he was waiting for her to come down the stairs and sing softly as she did every day. It was 8:30 in the morning when I decided to dial. I'm not sure what I expected to hear. Maybe he had changed his mind, that he had woken up with his heart in place. To say, "Father, I'm on my way." But what came? It was something else. The line called 4 times. Then Kyle's voice came out, slurred and still a little sleepy. "Hello? Son, it's me. Hi, Dad. How are you?" I took a deep breath. The funeral starts at 11:30. On the other side, silence was replaced by noise. Loud music, people laughing. Lindsay's voice shouting something over the candles on the cake. He cleared his throat. "So, Father, remember what I said yesterday? Lindsay's party is today. We are receiving people here in the salon. There are suppliers arriving, DJs, food arriving. I can't get out now. We planned this months ago." For a moment I thought he was joking. "Your mother's funeral is today, Kyle, once in a lifetime, and she was his mother." He sighed, impatient. "Look, Dad, I know, but Mom already, it's gone. And Lindsay's birthday is only once a year." Once a year. He said that, as if his mother's 35 years of love, upbringing, and sacrifice could be exchanged for a cupcake buffet and a Chicago cover band. At that moment, I squeezed the phone tightly. I looked at the funeral program, which was on the table. Kyle's name was there, as one of the coffin bearers. Eleanor had made a point of it. "He's going to want to follow him to the end," she said one day, still with hope in her eyes. She has always defended him, even when he didn't deserve so much. The line dropped. There was no farewell, not a "I'm sorry," only the dial tone. I stayed there. Property. The clock on the wall read 8:47. 3 minutes staring at nothing with Eleanor's reading glasses next to me. Her ring is still in the velvet box. The house, empty. It's hard to explain this feeling to those who have never been there. When we realize that we have created someone who no longer feels for you, it's as if time froze, as if the silence screamed, "Allow me a pause here." because maybe you who listen to me now have already felt something similar. Have you ever looked at someone in your family and thought, where did I go wrong? Have you ever realized that you gave everything, and now you are treated as nothing? If this feeling touched you, write in the comments. Just say, I've lived that, or it's true. That way I'll know I'm not alone, that there are still people who feel it. Gradually, with a steady hand, I picked up the funeral program and crossed out Kyle's name with my fountain pen. Only one trace. Firm, straight, definitive. It was symbolic, as if I had also crossed out the last illusion I still had about him. Eleanor deserved more. She deserved her son to be by her side at that moment. I got up, put on my coat, and closed the door of the house. Outside, the wind cut his face, but inside, the cold was different. But what I didn't know at that moment was that the worst was yet to come, because a few hours later, Kyle would come back to me, and what he asked for, it was so absurd, so insensitive, that to this day it is hard for me to believe. Do you want to know what he had the courage to say after all this? So listen to me in the next part, because it was there that my decision began to take shape. On the way to the cemetery, I drove slowly, as if every mile was one more farewell. The city looked the same, but inside me everything had changed. Cars hurried past Interstate 80 as I walked in silence. The funeral program in the passenger seat, Kyle's name still scratched out. Arriving at the Riverside Cemetery Chapel, I saw some familiar faces in the parking lot. There were not many, 20, maybe 23 people. Patricia, Eleanor's sister, was wearing a black coat and a scarf around her neck. He came to me with teary eyes. "Where's Kyle?" he asked quietly, as if fearing the answer. I just said, "Compromises." She bit her lips and looked away. No one asked anymore. But his absence filled the room with an invisible presence, a gaping hole in the midst of the pain. The ceremony began punctually. The pastor spoke beautiful words about love, memory, and legacy. I almost didn't hear it. I was there, sitting in the front row, but my mind went back in time. I remembered young Eleanor walking down the aisle of the church in that dress she inherited from her grandmother, of the Sunday lunches that she prepared with care, from the afternoons when she helped Kyle with his homework, while I washed the truck outside. That boy with blonde hair and curious looks. Now he was in Chicago, organizing balloons and giveaways. As I held the program in my sweaty hands, I felt like I was burying two people, the woman of my life, and the illusion that I still had a child. When it came time for the coffin bearers, two friends of mine from the garden club offered to help. One of them, Mr. Lowell, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "It's an honor." I just nodded with a lump stuck in my throat. Kyle should be there. That was his mother's last walk, but she came down to earth alone. The sound of the earth falling on the coffin was one of the hardest I've ever heard in my life. Eleanor was always terrified of being forgotten, even if she never said it out loud. And now, his own son was not there to say his final goodbye. When it was all over, I was last. Patricia approached and said, "She deserved more." I nodded with my eyes because I couldn't speak. Most people left quietly. Some hugged me. Others just nodded from afar, respectfully. The truth is that at that moment, even surrounded by people, I never felt so alone. I returned home with an empty car. The passenger seat where Eleanor always sat seemed larger. She loved to tell her what song to play on the radio, but now the radio was off. The house, when I arrived, was in the same place, but it seemed different. The flowery curtains she liked so much fluttered in the wind, and I sat down in the brown armchair that she said didn't go with anything. "But it suits you, Richard," she said, laughing. I stayed there for a long time, without turning on the television, without touching the phone, just listening to the sound of the kitchen clock and remembering the sacrifices we made for Kyle, of the days she spent taking care of him when she had asthma, the times she didn't buy a new dress to pay for her college tuition, of the birthday cards she wrote to him with such affection, even when he forgot to respond. She always had hope, even when he didn't call at Christmas, even when I missed her appointment dates. "He's busy, love. Young people have a lot on their minds," she said, always running his hand over the hurt, as if smoothing a crumpled towel and pretending that everything is right. But now there was no way to straighten anything. Now it was land on top, silence inside, and an absence that hurt more than any wound I've ever had in my life. I remember looking at her ring, still in the ring of the velvet box, I took it carefully. I spun between my fingers. Eleanor had thin, delicate fingers. She was a firm woman but soft-hearted, and even there, with her already underground, I knew what she would say. Forgive Richard. He is our son. But there, sitting in that room with my phone muted with no message from Kyle, I couldn't feel anything but emptiness. That kind of emptiness that we only understand when someone who was everything, it becomes just a memory. But little did I know that that silence would be broken a few hours later. The phone would ring, and on the other side, his voice would come up again, not with regret, but with a request that would change everything. And it was there that for the first time in my life I thought about saying no. But did I say so? Or did Eleanor's voice speak louder? You'll find out now. Because it was at that moment that everything began to change. The house seemed bigger, but not for space. It was silence. It spread through the rooms like an invisible mist, covering everything. Every empty chair, every curtain stopped, every lamp turned off. Everything spoke louder than any voice. I took off my jacket and put it on the armchair. The tie still tightened around my neck as if reminding me that I was still in prison that day. I walked to the kitchen and saw Eleanor's cup still there, intact. The coffee, now cold, had a dark and forgotten color, as if it reflected what I felt inside. I sat down. The clock on the wall ticked, as if to mock the time I hadn't enjoyed with her in the last few months. So many trips to the doctor that she rescheduled because Kyle was in need. So many savings that she put aside to help with the down payment on their apartment. On the wall, an old photo of the three of them. Me, Eleanor, and little Kyle, holding an ice cream and smiling toothlessly. In that image, we were everything to each other. I got up and went to her closet. I don't know what I was looking for, but something pulled me. At the bottom of the drawer, between stored cards and scented tissues, I found a white envelope. It said, "For after the goodbye." My heart froze. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it carefully. Her handwriting was shaky but firm. "Richard, if you're reading this, it's because my time is up. But I want to ask you one thing. Don't let Kyle forget who we were. Remember where he came from. And if you can, make him understand what real love is, even if it hurts." I folded the paper with trembling hands and stared at the floor for long minutes. What she was asking me, it was more than forgiveness. It was for me to remind our son of what he erased. I went back to the living room and took a blank sheet. I started to write it down. Private school from 6 to 18 years old, 12 years of tuition, then college. We pay for everything. Summer course in Europe that he said everyone went. The car on his 21st birthday. The apartment in Chicago. The reform. Lindsay's wedding party. 260 guests, all paid for by us. And then, travel. Gifts, loans, in no hurry to repay, quotas of the company that I gave him out of trust. I was pulling my memory. My head is good for remembering pain. I wrote down values. I did the math, slowly, with Eleanor's old desktop calculator. The final number stared at me as a slap. More than $800,000. 800,000. And he didn't even have the courage to go to his mother's funeral. I stared at the number, standing still, with the afternoon light coming in weakly through the window. It wasn't the money. It never was. It was the fact that all of this, it was forgotten, as if it had never existed, as if we were born to serve, and then be discarded. I remembered a time when Eleanor coughed so much that she had to cancel an imaging exam. It was expensive, and Kyle needed help with Lindsay's MBA funding. I remember how she smiled and said, "Then I'll remove it, love. First, the boys. The boys. Always first. Always priority." And now she rested alone. And he, well, he was 100 miles from here, surrounded by gifts and friends, singing happy birthday to a woman who never knew who Eleanor really was. The walls of the house seemed to squeeze me, as if they were yelling at me, "How long are you going to accept?" And I had no more answer. For the first time, I didn't know what to do. But something inside me started to move, a kind of tiredness, but not physical. It was as if a part of me, which had always given in, was waking up and asking myself, "Richard, how long are you going to be the only one who remembers?" I stood there, in the middle of the room, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel angry, not the one that screams or breaks things, but the one that stays silent and starts planning. And it was then that I heard the noise, the phone ringing again. On the display, his name, Kyle, again, as if the universe wanted to test my memory, my strength, my promise to Eleanor. I picked up the device with steady hands, answered, and what he told me, it was worse than I imagined. He didn't just ignore the pain. He wanted more. Want to know what it was? What he had the courage to ask for? Less than 24 hours after burying his own mother? Well, get ready, because in the next part you will understand the kind of children that time has created, and why, at that moment, I knew that something inside me had changed forever. The day after the burial, I woke up unhurriedly. The body was still heavy, but it was the soul that hurt. I crawled into the kitchen and poured water on the stove. I didn't even want coffee, but making breakfast has always been my ritual. It was what connected me to life in some way. Eleanor's cup was still there, intact, as if waiting for her. I ran my hand over the handle, closed my eyes. A deep sigh. It was at that moment that the phone rang again. It was him. The name Kyle glowing on the screen like an open wound. Answered. Dad, good morning. Is everything okay there? His voice came light, casual, almost too happy. Yesterday was a success. Lindsay was so happy with the surprise. You needed to see her face. The band played those old songs that you like, you know? Chicago, Bee Gees. It was too awesome. Oh, and the gifts. Wow, she got a beautiful bracelet from Aunt Julie. And dinner. It was on the terrace of the hotel. I didn't say anything, I only listened. And every word he said cut me more. Because there, in that entire conversation, he didn't mention his mother's name once. No questions. No, how are you, Dad? No reference to the fact that, less than 24 hours ago, he had lost the woman who put him into the world. So, Dad, actually, I called you also for something else. We have some bills here from the party that escaped the budget, and Lindsay's card blew out. There are about $15,000 missing to cover everything. Can you make a transfer today because suppliers are already charging? Silence. On my side, silence. At the back of the call, I heard her voice. Lindsay. Talk to him right away, Kyle. I should have solved this by now. She spoke loudly, unceremoniously, as if I were an ATM with emotions. My heart raced, but my voice, she remained calm. Kyle, do you know what happened yesterday? He hesitated for a second. Yes, Dad. Clear. I know. It was the funeral. And I'm really sorry, but life goes on, right? Mom wouldn't want us to sink into sadness. That sentence hit me like a punch in the stomach. Life goes on. And he used his mother's memory to justify a party debt. I took a deep breath. I leaned on the edge of the sink. No, Kyle. I'm not going to transfer any money. On the other end of the line, his tone changed. What do you mean, Dad? You have always helped. Always. Why would it be any different now? I was silent for a few seconds, and then, in a firm voice, he said, Because now she's not here anymore. He laughed. He laughed nervously. Mommy wouldn't want you to do that. She would be disappointed in you. I closed my eyes. A meek anger rose in his chest. Not the one that screams, but the one that cuts the ties from within. Don't use your mother's name to justify this. And then, I hung up. For the first time in my life, I was the one who hung up. I sat back down at the table. The kettle beeped, but I let it. The whistle was the only sound that made sense there. My hand trembled, but not from fear. It was as if the no that I never had the courage to say had finally left, and it came out in one piece. I stood there looking out the window, and for the first time I felt something strange, a mixture of pain and relief, as if, by saying no, I had buried more than Eleanor. I buried there the man who lived in fear of losing the love of a son who never really loved me. Look, I'm here, opening my heart, telling you this as if I were sitting with you on any balcony. If you're listening to me, leave a like on this video. Sign up too. It's not out of vanity, no. It's just that telling all this alone is difficult, and knowing that there's someone on the other side listening to me, it helps me to continue. I still have a lot in store to tell you. Because what happened after that call, it was the beginning of a change that even I didn't expect. A change that started inside me, but soon spread. You know what? Kyle would still return. And this time, It wouldn't be for money. It would be out of desperation. But then, it was too late. Or is it? I spent the next few days in silence. Not that silence of someone who expects something, but that of those who have already understood everything. Every corner of the house seemed to tell me a part of the story that I insisted on not seeing for too long. I opened the drawers one by one. Old files, plastic folders, envelopes full of receipts. I started to put together what I called, just for me, the favor account. It was as if I was finally ready to see the size of the delivery. And above all, the total absence of return. I took a light blue folder that Eleanor used to store important documents. There were copies of the first checks we gave Kyle, the one from private school, the one from college enrollment, the one from the graduation trip. Everything written down, everything detailed. Eleanor has always been organized with paperwork, and now, it was as if she was guiding me through this inventory of our generosity. I also found school reports that she kept fondly, even when his grades were not that great. Little notes from when he was a child. "Mommy, I love you," scribbled with colored pencils. Those memories hurt more than the numbers. But I continued. I took the calculator. He added up while reliving each sacrifice. I saw there the day she sold her mother's jewelry to help finance his first car, the black Honda that he didn't even wash properly. I found a receipt from the travel agency, our help for their honeymoon in Tulum. And I remembered how Eleanor stayed at home that week with a coughing fit and refused to go to the doctor, saying, "Leave it, love. Now it's their time. Then I'll see that. After. Always the after. Always them first, and she later." I kept scouring. I found a little notebook with a red cover, Eleanor's diary. There was a simple note, but it dismantled me. I postponed the imaging exam because Kyle's car broke down. I preferred to help with the repair. I closed the notebook slowly. It was like reading her silence aloud. How many times did she hide pain so as not to weigh it down on him? How many times did she pretend that everything was fine, just to keep that spoiled son comfortable? I started to feel something I didn't know how to name. It wasn't just sadness. It was a mixture of shame and anger. Shame for having allowed it. Anger for having taken so long to see. I spent the whole night organizing the documents. I put everything in a black folder. At the top I wrote, "Kyle." It was more than a dossier. It was a mirror. And when I finished, I sat in front of that folder and stared. That was our story, told by bank statements, resignations, and forgetfulness. No return line, no gratitude page. And I kept thinking about how many fathers and mothers do this, how many live to serve, how many spend a lifetime saying yes, thinking that love and debt are the same thing, how many die without ever hearing a thank you, and how many children confuse affection with obligation. That morning, with the whole house in silence, I decided I was no longer going to live with this account open. He would no longer carry on his back the weight of a relationship that only existed when he needed it. The sorrow, which had previously consumed me slowly, now turned into clarity. And clarity, it is a form of freedom. The next day, I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. I asked to schedule a conversation. I didn't go into details, I just said, "I need to review some documents and make a decision that I've already taken too long." He understood. He said he was waiting for me on Tuesday at 10 a.m., and I went. But what I took with me in that briefcase, it was more than papers. It was everything Eleanor and I were, everything we deliver, everything we lost, and it was time to turn that into something more. Do you know what I decided to do in that office? What did I ask to be done with every penny that was once in his name? So stay with me, because in the next part, justice begins, and it comes in silence. But when it comes, no one forgets. On Tuesday, at 10 o'clock, I parked in the usual parking space in front of the building of the construction company that I founded with my own hands more than 40 years ago. The sign at the entrance read, R. Langford and Sons, a name that carried a weight that for a long time I thought was honor, but now I knew it was just fantasy. I walked through the lobby slowly. All the employees greeted me with respect, but also with that look of someone who feels that something is about to happen. And they were right, because there on that day I didn't come in as a father. I entered as the owner. I went through the reception, went up to the second floor, and went straight to my office. It was still the same as always. Oak table, family photos on the wall, the model of the first building I built with my own hands. But something was different about me. I sat in the chair, and pulled up Kyle's reports. Sarah Mitchell, our HR director, had left a detailed folder on his performance. I started reading. Systematic delays, missed meetings, documents delivered in error, supplier complaints, employees who avoided working with him, and more. Improper purchases on the corporate card, expensive meals with customers that no one identified, hotel nights during events that he did not even attend. Leaf after leaf. I read it with colder and colder eyes, because deep down, I already knew. I just didn't want to see it. But there, on paper, it was impossible to deny. If any other employee had this history, he would have already been dismissed in the first half of the year. But he was the son of the owner, and that has always protected him, not for merit but for convenience. I knocked on the door and asked Sarah to come in. She was a discreet but firm woman. He has worked with me for more than 20 years. He always knew how to separate affection from professionalism. He sat down in front of me with a suppressed sigh. "Have you read it all, Mr. Langford?" "I read it. Do you want my honest opinion?" "I want to." She rested her hands on the briefcase. "Your son is no longer fit for this position. In fact, it never did. But no one here had the courage to say that." I shook my head. I knew it. And that hurt. Because it wasn't just the truth about professional Kyle. It was the truth about her son Kyle. The man who, even with all the chances, has never been committed to anything other than his own navel. "You can schedule the meeting for Friday. Formal. I want it to be registered. It will be done as with any other employee." Sarah looked at me with a mixture of surprise and respect. "Understood?" As she left the room, I looked again at the photos on the wall. There was one from Eleanor smiling on the day we opened our first branch, and another of Kyle, still small, holding the safety helmet bigger than his head. I approached the frame, ran my fingers over the glass and whispered, "Sorry, my love, but now it's time to do what should have been done years ago." It's strange to say, but in that instant I felt a kind of peace, a firmness that had not visited me for a long time. It was as if I had finally stopped lying to myself, because loving someone is not letting that person destroy everything around them. Love, it is also to set limits. And look, if you've been following this story so far, I'll tell you one thing. Don't leave now, no, because what's about to happen, it's what marked me the most in this life. And I'll still tell you everything until the end, because there are things that only those who live understand. I closed the door to the room, sat down again and took a blank sheet. I started to write down the next steps. It wasn't just about firing. It was about breaking the cycle of guilt, fear, emotional dependence. I knew he was going to react badly. Who was going to call me cold, ungrateful, even cruel? But nothing would be more cruel than to continue sustaining the lie that this was a united family. On Friday at 11 a.m., Kyle would be sitting in that same chair. And there, face to face, I was going to say, with all the calmness in the world, that his time at the company had come to an end. Not out of revenge, but for justice. Now, can you imagine how he reacted when he heard that? Because he came prepared for another favor. But I was ready to say goodbye. And his reaction, well, this one you need to hear with your own ears. Because there, for the first time, he saw who I really was. And what he saw, he wasn't prepared to face it. Friday, 11:05 in the morning. Late, as always. Kyle entered the office with that flashy manner, shirt uncovered. "So, Dad, what was so urgent?" "I was in the middle of a call with some investors, but I left everything to come here." "Speak up." I didn't smile. I didn't even get up from my chair. I just pointed to the other end of the table, where Sarah was already sitting with the document folder on her lap. Kyle looked at her, then at me, and for the first time, I saw his eyes trying to understand that this was not another one of those dates where he would leave with some favor under his arm. "Sit down, please." He laughed. "What is this climate? It looks like they're going to send me away." Sarah opened the folder, took 2 copies of a document, put a pen on top. I took a deep breath. "Kyle, this is a formal shutdown meeting. You are being terminated from the company effective immediately." His laughter disappeared. He stood still, as if waiting for the hidden camera to come out from behind the vase. "What do you mean, Dad?" "As president of R. Langford and Philos, I evaluated their performance, behavior, and impact on the company, and I can't keep you here anymore. If it was any other employee with his track record, he would have been fired years ago. That needed to be done. He looked at Sarah, then at me. Are you serious? I am. He got up from his chair, took a step back. You can't do that. I am your son. This is rightfully mine. No, Kyle. Nothing is by right. Everything is on merit. And you lost yours a long time ago. He began to walk around the room, agitated. You're not thinking about the grandchildren. In everything we have built, this will destroy our relationship. Son, what destroyed our relationship was you. There he froze, as if the penny had finally dropped. The color of his face changed. His chest went up and down fast. Eleanor would never accept that, he said. Maybe not, but Eleanor also didn't deserve to die alone, and not even that her own son would exchange her funeral for a party. The silence that followed was dense. Sarah handed over the documents. You can sign here. HR will direct you the rest of the process. He took the pen, but did not sign. He gathered the papers, crumpled them, and threw them on the floor. You're a bitter old man. You're going to die alone, did you know that? I stood. I'd rather die alone than live surrounded by those who only approach when they need to. Sarah called security. 2 employees escorted Kyle to the elevator. As they passed through the central room, I noticed the looks. No one said a word, but everyone knew. It was as if the whole building let out a sigh of relief. The spoiled air, the dead weight, was finally out. In the lobby, before leaving, he still tried to put on the last show. Megan, the wife, suddenly appeared. I don't even know how she knew. He came tapping his heel on the marble, screaming, You're going to pay dearly for this. It's illegal. You have an obligation to the family. This is an abuse of power. Security tried to calm her down, but she pushed one of the boys. We're going to sue you, you old ingrate. I looked at her calmly and said, You can try. She was taken out of the building, still screaming, and I, for the first time in a long time, sat in the meeting room, in peace. Let me tell you something now. When a father gives up a child, it's not for lack of love. It's due to excessive pain. We can handle a lot. Swallow dry. Close your eyes. Forgive. Try again. But there comes a time that the heart can't take it anymore. And when that point comes, my friend, there is no turning back. If you've experienced something similar, or know someone who has gone through it, write in the comments. It just says, I understand you, or it's true. Sometimes all we need is to know that we are not alone on this road. But believe me, what happened after that dismissal, it was even more revealing. Because that's when the game really turned. And when desperation knocks on the door, those who have never known how to love begin to show who they really are. And he did, in a way that even I didn't expect. The next morning, even before the coffee was ready, the intercom rang. It was from the reception. Mr. Langford, Mrs. Megan is down here demanding to speak with you. I took a deep breath, looked out the window, the sky still a little blue-gray, with that cold that begins to enter through the cracks of the soul. I replied calmly, Ask him to go upstairs, but let it come alone. I knew she would come. He also knew that he would not come in peace. Megan came into my room with her heels marking the floor like war beats. I was made up as if it were for an award. Tight dress, perfume too strong, looked poisonous. She closed the door tightly without asking permission and began, What you did to my husband was criminal. This will have consequences. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I sat down, just observing. She continued, Kyle gave his life for this company, and you just fire him in front of everyone like he's an intern? Do you think you'll get away with it? We are going to file a lawsuit. I'll take half of what's yours, and also the inheritance of his dear Eleanor, because Kyle is heir and I'm his wife. I have rights. I looked at her with the same silence with which I looked at Eleanor's coffin, with that peace that only those who have nothing left to lose can carry. I opened the desk drawer, took out a white envelope and handed it to me. You can read it. It is Eleanor's testament, updated 3 months ago when she already knew it wouldn't last long. Megan took the envelope in a hurry, as if waiting for a check. He opened it, began to read in a low voice. The face was changing, his eyes wide, the mouth dries up. But this here says that she left everything for you, just for you, even Kyle's actions. Yes, she signed in her own hand with witnesses. It is registered in a notary's office. Eleanor knew what she was doing, and I knew very well who you were. Her voice rose 3 tones. This is manipulation. You convinced her. You took advantage of the disease. No, she did it in good conscience, and it wasn't out of anger. It was for protection. To protect what we have built from you. That's when she lost control. He slammed his hand on the table. You're a crazy old man. This is elder abuse, that's right. I'm going to finish you off with your reputation, your company, everything. Security had already been called by Sarah, who heard everything from the anteroom. 2 employees entered and positioned themselves next to the door. Megan was still screaming. You're going to die alone in this cold office, thinking you won, but everyone hates you. Go live with regret until your last breath. The employees approached. Madam, please. She turned around, pulled her purse, dropped a briefcase on the floor, and pushed out, screaming down the stairs. Outside, all the employees had stopped. The whole building already knew who was who, and what was revealed that day. He was never forgotten. Minutes later, Kyle appeared. His eyes were lowered, his face pale. He looked smaller, like a boy after the scolding. He stayed at the door. He didn't get in. Dad, I know she was past the point, but we could talk, just the 2 of us. As a family. I stared at him for long seconds, not angry, but with that lucidity that comes after the storm. The voice came out firm but without hatred. You are my son. Now, it's just someone I met. And I turned my back. He didn't say anything. He didn't even try to argue. He just stood there, as if waiting for me to turn back. But I didn't come back. Because who has lost everything, he is no longer afraid of losing the rest. And in that instant, I knew. The cut was done. There were no more bridges, only memories. A good one, other scarring. But do you think it ended there? Well, just wait to see what he did next. Because when the mask falls, despair begins to knock on the door. And some people, when they realize that they have lost control, they do things that no one expects. That week, still with the bitter taste of recent events in my mouth, I returned to the office of my old friend and lawyer, Robert Chen. I've known Robert since the days when my hair was still dark and my spine was erect. He was the one who took care of all the paperwork when I bought my first house, when Kyle was born, when I started my company, and it was also he who took care of the division of Eleanor's family land. A discreet, direct, and above all loyal man. I entered his office with firm steps. There was no hesitation in my body. It was as if I had finally understood what my place in history was, not as a victim, but as an author. Robert, I said, sitting in front of the table, I want to rewrite my will. From scratch. He took off his glasses, looked at me over the frame. Are you sure? Absolute. I explained calmly. I detailed it point by point. The patrimony accumulated in 40 years of work, the company's shares, the real estate, the applications, everything. And I made it very clear. Kyle is out. And any descendant of his too. Robert wrote it down in silence. I spoke precisely, like someone who was cleansing his own soul with every decision. I want to create a foundation, Robert. A foundation in the name of Eleanor. I want you to call it Eleanor Foster Memorial Foundation. He nodded. And what will be the purpose of the foundation? 2 things. Scholarships for cash-strapped youth and support for cancer research, especially breast cancer. She deserved it. She always wanted to help more people than she could. He continued writing. I want everything to be irrevocable, armored, so that never, under any circumstances, Kyle or anyone else gets their hands on it, neither directly nor indirectly. Robert took a deep breath. This will cause reactions. It has already caused it. Now I'm just making it official. We stayed there for more than 2 hours. He reviewed clause by clause, read each term with me, explained the legal details. When I left that office, the feeling was unlike anything I had ever felt. I wasn't just cutting a noose, I was planting a flag. The flag of the memory of the woman who gave me everything, and that he deserved much more than an absence on the day of the burial. Eleanor has always had her heart turned to others. As a young man, he volunteered at the local hospital. After we got married, she always took a piece of what was ours to donate. Food baskets, clothes, even furniture. Once I remember her saying, "If we die and leave nothing but walls, we die twice." For now, she will live longer than ever. I insisted that the foundation's headquarters be where our first office used to be, a small building with red bricks and tall windows. I had it restored, renovated, and put a sign at the entrance. Here a new future is born, in the name of those who have never forgotten the past. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. This makes more difference than you think. Sometimes all we need is to know that there is still someone listening. But don't think Kyle was silent when he heard about the foundation. When he received the news, the silence turned to fury. And that's when he did something that no parent expects to hear from a child. Something that still echoes in my thoughts to this day. Want to know what it was? So don't let go of me. Because the next chapter is the cruelest. The news spread in less than a week. There was no need for a headline, no public scandal. In cities like Davenport, stories run between the lines of tea invitations, lunches at the country club, and discreet whispers in the aisles of the church. And when someone steps outside of what is considered honor, judgment does not come with shouts. Comes with silence. A silence that excludes, that closes doors, that turns even the loudest of the arrogant into shadows. I heard that Patricia, Eleanor's sister, and my longtime sister-in-law, was one of the first to react. She was never a rodeo woman, and when he learned that Kyle didn't show up at his mother's funeral, he made sure to make that clear at the dinner table at the club where he plays bridge every Thursday. He told, with all the letters, what happened. He said he saw my face on the day of the burial, more grieving for his absent son than for his departing wife. He also said, and rightly so, that this was the end of respect. People listened, and they kept silent. But from then on, Kyle's name became synonymous with disappointment. I was told that Megan was barred from the Pilates studio where she used to give orders as if she owned the place. The owner, an elegant lady named June, just looked at her and said, "Not here. We prefer present mothers to arrogant wives." Megan stormed out. He never returned. The saleswomen at the luxury boutique on Main Street, who once rushed to show off the new collections, now ignore her. They do not offer coffee, nor do they compliment the dress. They look at it as if observing an old mannequin in the window. Outdated, worthless. At the country club, Kyle started to receive crossed looks. Business friends avoided inviting him. At the last charity brunch, the place where he always sat was occupied by another. No explanation, no discussion, just busy. I learned that he tried to schedule a meeting with 2 former investors of the construction company. None answered. One of them, more direct, just said, "I prefer to deal with men who bury their mothers before feasting with their wives." And me? I stayed in my corner, listening to the stories come to me like soft ripples pounding at the edge of the lake. I didn't party. Don't smile. He didn't provoke. I just absorbed. Because real justice, it never needs an audience. It's curious how life takes turns, how what seemed unshakable dismantles in silence. I always knew that Davenport had its rules, and even those who live by appearance at some point must pay the price for what they tried to hide. And Kyle, well, he single-handedly built this new place he was pushed to, the outside. Megan tried to react. They say he spread rumors, tried to victimize himself, cried in public, but it was no use. Davenport can forgive bankruptcy, divorce, even adultery. But mother's abandonment? Not that. That marks. And between one news and another, between a report by Patricia and a phrase heard in the market, I began to feel that something was changing, as if that silence, which once hurt me, was now a blanket, a kind of justice that does not scream, but weighs, and that shows that even those who have everything, it can end up with nothing. If you've come this far with me, don't let go now, because the most important thing is yet to come. There is still a part of this story that I kept it deep in my chest, and only now, after everything, I was able to understand the real reason Eleanor left me that letter. Want to know what she wrote in the last few lines? What she saw before me? And that changed everything? So hold on, because in the next part comes the revelation that turned my world upside down. I received the call from the bank on a cold January afternoon. The name appeared on the cell phone screen, First National Bank, and I already knew it was not a good thing. I answered calmly. The voice on the other end was Gerald's, the manager who had known me for more than 20 years. Always solicitous, always polite. But that day, he wore a different tone. A tone that tries to be professional but carries discomfort. "Mr. Langford, sorry to bother you, but we need to talk about the mortgage on your son, Kyle Langford's residence. The property is more than 60 days late in payment, and as you are a guarantor, we need action to be taken in the coming days." I listened to everything in silence. I didn't ask how much the value was, not even when the first installment was due. I thanked them, asked them to prepare the necessary documents, and scheduled a meeting for the next day. I hung up the phone and stared at the frame on the fireplace for a while. It was a photo of us, me and Eleanor's, taken in a park in Boston in the fall many years ago. The orange leaves fell slowly. She had her hair tied up in a simple bun, and that serene smile that always gave me peace. I took the frame, ran my finger over the edge, and said, "It's going to start, honey. But now, our way." The next morning I put on my best suit, not out of vanity but out of respect. Respect for the story I was about to close, and for the woman who taught me that firmness can come without screaming. At the bank, Gerald was waiting for me in a private room. When I entered, he tried to smile, but it was a yellow smile. "Mr. Langford, I really regret that we have reached this point. Maybe you can cover the amount and renegotiate with your son." I sat down slowly, opened my leather briefcase, and pulled out a thick envelope. I handed it over without saying anything. Gerald flipped through the papers, his eyes scurrying across the lines, trying to understand. In the middle of reading, he raised his eyebrows. "Are you formalizing the withdrawal of your guarantee?" "Exactly. But you know what that means. The foreclosure process will be initiated. The house could go up for auction in weeks." "I know. Sign and register. That's all I ask." He hesitated, as if waiting for a second chance to turn back. But I didn't hesitate. I just stood there, firm. No anger, no rematch, only the truth and paper. When everything was signed, he walked me to the door. He said, in a lower tone, "I never thought I would see you doing this." I replied, "Neither do I, Gerald. Neither did I. That house I helped to buy. I drove stakes into that ground with my bare hands. I remember the day I handed Kyle the key. He was euphoric. Megan even threw a party to show the pool to her friends. And now, the house was going to be taken. Not because of me, but because of the choices he made. And for the choices I finally had the courage to make. You know, there are things in life that we never forget. A smell, a song, a phrase. But there are memories that are recorded not because they are beautiful, but because they mark the exact point where everything changed. Where you stopped being just someone who gives in and became someone who decides. You there, who are listening to me now. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever had to cut a bow, even though you love it? Or do you know someone who had to stop protecting to start protecting themselves? Tell me in the comments. He just writes, "I've felt that," or "I understand you." Because sometimes sharing pain is also a form of healing. I returned home that day and sat in the armchair in the living room, the same as always. I put an old record to play, Louis Armstrong, and I stayed there, with his eyes open, but his mind going back in time. Would Eleanor have done the same? Maybe not. Maybe he had waited a little longer. But she trusted me, and I trust that wherever she is right now, he is at peace knowing that even in pain we can still build some dignity. But it's like they say, when one door closes, others slam. And that's exactly what happened, because a few days later, someone showed up at my door. And what this person told me, I never expected to hear it. And maybe you're not ready to know either. Winter arrived earlier that year. I remember because the leaves had barely fallen and the wind was already cutting like a knife through the streets of Davenport. I walked less, stayed more at home, drinking my coffee slowly on the covered porch, listening to the wood crackle in the cold. It was at these moments that the neighbors passed. Some stopped to talk, others just waved. And little by little, I began to hear the whispers. First came Diane's comment from the flower shop. "Richard, it looks like Kyle has been looking for a job there at Charlie's Carrier, but nobody wanted to take it. I made it none of my business, but I kept it." Then it was Joe from the Corner Post. "Your son showed up with such a beautiful resume, but the HR lady told me that he left huffing and puffing when they asked for references." And then came the owner of the cafeteria where Eleanor and I had coffee on Fridays. "I heard that Kyle is now abandoned, that Megan has left." The pieces began to fall into place. Kyle was knocking on doors trying to find a place in the world again, but the city already knew too much. His story, of the absent heir, of the ungrateful son, had taken shape, and Davenport may seem small, but it has a long memory. I was told that he even tried to get a job at a dealership in Bettendorf. He entered full of himself, with a plasticized resume, starched jacket, talking as if he were still the owner of a construction company. But the manager recognized him. I had a cousin who worked with me. He said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Langford, we don't have vacancies at the moment." Even with a seller wanted sign on the door. The house, the one he lost by not paying the mortgage, had the power cut off. Then the water. The cards refused purchases even in the market. And as Megan was not used to this life of limits, she freaked out. He fought, cursed, cried. She is said to have been seen yelling at him in the Walmart parking lot, blaming the mean old dad for everything. That's when she decided to leave the scene. He took his bags and left for Evanston to his parents' house, alone, leaving Kyle in ruins. He, with no alternative, asked for shelter from an acquaintance, a certain Rick, with whom he played golf in the past. He spent 2 weeks on the couch but was expelled after using the host's card without permission. The fall was slow but total, and the end of this spiral came on a Sunday afternoon when Tom, an old gas station attendant on Route 6, stopped by my house to give me some borrowed tools. In the middle of the conversation, he blurted out, "Oh, and do you know who's there on the night shift now? His son, Kyle. He's been taking turns with me since Tuesday." I didn't ask anything else. I just thanked you for the information. It was not pleasure that I felt, nor revenge. It was a silence, like that of the earth after the frost. Everything is quiet, all clear. Kyle, that boy Eleanor cradled on fever nights, that young man who received a new car on graduation day, that man who turned his back on the day of his own mother's funeral. Now he was serving fuel to strangers, wiping windshields, and listening to impatient honks. And as hard as it was to say that, that was perhaps the best thing that could have happened to him. Funny how life is sometimes fairer than us, more direct, more accurate. If you've been following this here since the beginning, I'll tell you, it doesn't stop now, because there's still something I need to tell, something that happened days later, something I didn't expect, and that made me sit down, put my hands in my lap and rethink everything, because when someone you love loses everything, and yet it appears at your door, what do you do? That morning the Iowa sky looked grayer than usual. The clouds dragged heavy, as if they knew that something definitive was about to happen. I left home early, put on my dark wool coat, put on my favorite hat, the one Eleanor gave me on our 40th wedding anniversary, and got in the car with only one destination, the address where my son had been raised, and that it would now go to auction. I parked a few houses away. He didn't want to be seen. It didn't have to be. I stood there, inside the black sedan, watching through the window the small group of interested people who gathered in front of the house. It was strange to look at that balcony, the same one where I saw Kyle take his first steps, where Eleanor spread sheets in the sun, where we celebrated so many Christmases. But there, at that moment, there was no more memory, only consequence. Among those present, a man in a dark suit spoke little, took notes a lot. He was the legal representative of the foundation, sent by me, but no one knew. Not even he knew the full story. I had only received the order to acquire the house in my legal name, linked to the Eleanor Foster Memorial Foundation. Soon after, Kyle and Megan arrived. She had swollen eyes and her hair tied up anyway. She looked haggard, nervous, but still tried to keep her high heels as a kind of armor. Kyle was different. He wore a threadbare jacket, unshaven, hunched shoulders. There was no more arrogance, just a tired body and an empty soul. The auctioneer started bidding. His voice echoed like hammers in his chest. Megan tried to interrupt, gesticulated, screamed, "This house is ours. This is injustice." But the officer, impassive, followed protocol. The bidding continued. Few participants. The foundation took it with ease. When they announced the winning buyer, Megan turned around trying to understand. One of the names in the documents caught his attention. She ran to the lawyer, demanded to see the paper, and when he realized that it was all in the name of the foundation created by me, she screamed. He screamed as if he saw the ground disappear under his feet. Kyle remained motionless. He did not try to prevent it. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the facade of the house, as if he no longer recognized her. I, from my corner, observed everything, not with pleasure, but firmly. That was not revenge. It was justice, with purpose. Months before, when I decided to create the foundation in the name of Eleanor, I had already drawn up this plan. If the house was lost, it would be rescued, not for Kyle, but for the sake of those who really needed it. It has already been decided. The house will be renovated, adapted, and given to an immigrant family with 3 young children. People who fight, who are grateful, who understand the value of a roof. And the room that once belonged to Kyle, it will become a library, with Eleanor's name engraved on a bronze plaque above the door. Eleanor Foster Room. For those who have never given up on learning, the city will know. Go visit, and he will remember. The auction is over. Megan was removed from the scene by the bailiff. Kyle stood there on the sidewalk for a while until he finally walked away, alone. I started the car and drove away. No honking. Without saying anything. Only with the certainty that some pains, when well handled, can become a legacy. But what I didn't expect was what would happen 2 days later. Because while I thought it was all over, a knock on my door once again changed the course of this story. And what happened in that reunion? It was something that not even Eleanor herself would have foreseen. 2 days after the auction, they knocked on my door. 3 dry, hesitant touches. I looked through the curtain before it opened. It was him. The face was older than I remembered, even though it had been a short time. The dark circles, the failed beard, the look that I didn't know if it was embarrassed or tired. I opened the door slowly. He didn't say anything for a few seconds, just standing there, his hands in his pockets and his shoulders hunched over like a punished boy. "Dad, can I ask you one last thing?" The voice came out choked. I didn't answer. I just grabbed my coat from the hanger and said, "Let's go for a walk." It was not an invitation, it was a condition. He understood. We went to Morrison Park. That place carried more memories than I could count. Every tree, every bench, every shade had a piece of our history. And it was on one of those benches, the same one where Eleanor sat with a book while I pushed Kyle to learn to ride a bike, that we sat, one on each side, without looking at each other directly. The cold wind swayed the dry leaves around us. He started slowly. "I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake, Dad. I let things get out of hand. I was blind. A Megan. The life we built. Everything seemed to be a priority, until everything collapsed. I lost everything, and maybe I deserve it. But you are still my father. I am still your child. And I just wanted a chance to fix it, even if it's just a little." He tried to hold back his tears, but they came anyway. I listened to him. Carefully. Take it easy. As Eleanor taught me to do. "Did you know that this bench here was the place where your mother sat while you cried with your knee scraped that time you fell off your bike?" He nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. "She was here for hours, even when cold, just because you wanted one more try. Remember that?" He gave an embarrassed smile. "I remember, I think. And do you remember her favorite flower?" There was a pause. He thought. He tried to search his memory. Then he replied cautiously, "Roses?" My heart was quiet inside. It didn't even hurt. It just confirmed what I already knew. "Daisies," I said. "Your mother loved daisies. I planted it every year in the back garden. Even you helped plant it once at the age of 6. He looked away, and I realized he never paid attention. He never really looked at the woman who spent her whole life trying to make him happy. The greatest pain was not that he missed the funeral. He didn't ask for money the next day. It was not losing the house, the name, the dignity. The biggest pain was this, realizing that even with everything we gave, he was never really present. I stood up. I put my hand on his shoulder, lightly, without rancor. I looked into his eyes for the first time that day. Now I understand everything. He sat there, not quite understanding what I meant by that. But it wasn't to understand. It was meant to feel. Because at that moment, in that gesture, I ended not only the conversation, but a hope that I had carried for years. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Like this video and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it. And now you must be wondering, was this the end between the two of us? No, because even after that, he even came back to my door once again, and this time, with a request I never thought I'd hear. That night, after the conversation in the park, I returned home in silence. The lights in the living room were off, but the whole house seemed to be lit up by the memory of her, Eleanor. I didn't light anything. I just went to the office, opened the last drawer of the old desk, and took out a notebook with a brown leather cover. Already worn out by time, by her hands, by the tears that may have wet these pages more than once without me noticing. It was my wife's diary, the place where she kept her innermost thoughts, her joys, her pains. And, as I would discover that night, his fears. I sat in her armchair, as I did on nights when she read while I watched television. I took a deep breath before opening it. I wasn't sure what I was looking for there. Perhaps consolation, maybe a confirmation. But what I found, everything changed. The front pages were sweet. She talked about Kyle's birth, about how curious, intelligent, laughing he was. Then, reports from childhood, the first day of school, the first fall on a bicycle, that same park. But as time passed on the pages, the tone changed. Doubts came, the veiled disappointments. And then in a passage almost at the end, with the handwriting already a little shaky, she wrote, "I'm afraid Kyle only loves our money. What if everything we gave erased what we are?" I reread this sentence about 5 times. With each reading it seemed stronger, more real. Those words carried weight. They were like a key opening a door I never wanted to face. She already knew. Before everything happened, before I even had the courage to think like that, she already felt that something was wrong. It was not bitterness. It was not revolt. It was lucidity. It was the love of a mother realizing with pain that perhaps she had raised a man unable to love back. That phrase, it became an open wound, but it also became strength. It was there that I understood that what I had been doing was not cruelty. It wasn't coldness. It was protection. It was respect. Respect for me and for her, for our history, for the memory of what we were together, and what didn't deserve to be tarnished. I closed the diary carefully, as if closing a definitive chapter. I walked to the safe, the one she had installed when we started to store the important documents. Inside, I placed the diary next to the New Testament. Together they told a truth that no one else could erase. I know that many fathers, many mothers carry this fear in silence, the fear that they were just providers, the fear of having raised children who value what was given, but not who gave. If you're here until now, listening to this story, I beg you, don't let go of my hand now, because what's next? It was the most unexpected moment of my life, and perhaps the truest, because the next day, he came back, and he made a request. Not money, nor forgiveness, but something I never expected to hear come out of my own son's mouth. The sun was shining high on that spring Saturday. The newly planted daisies swayed in the light wind that blew across the sidewalks of Davenport's East Quarter. I arrived early. Dark gray suit, polished shoes. The jacket heavy not for the fabric, but for the symbolic weight it carried. In the inner pocket a single flower, a daisy picked from the garden that was reborn at the back of the new building. The Eleanor Foster Community Center was about to open, and at that time it wasn't just a building. It was a symbol, a breather, an altar of justice for a woman who never asked for anything but always gave everything. Children laughed around the stretched red ribbon. The director of the foundation made the last adjustments on the table with the tribute plaques. Volunteers distributed small pamphlets with Eleanor's story. On the cover, a photo of her smiling, holding a homemade cake on one of the old Christmases, the same photo that was in our fireplace. Next to the improvised stage, a small exhibition with photos and letters from the first scholarship recipients. Young people from humble families, who were now attending universities and starting careers that previously seemed impossible. The choir took a stand. When they started singing "You Are My Sunshine," my eyes watered. It was the song Eleanor sang on the porch, watering her daisies, thinking no one heard. But I always listened. The ribbon was cut by 3 children, newly arrived siblings from a refugee family. They barely spoke English yet, but their eyes were shining with excitement. The crowd applauded. Some cried. The Davenport Gazette's coverage was already on the air even before the ceremony was over. The reporter asked me a few things. I preferred to respond with gestures, with looks. There was no day to give explanations. It was the day to give back to Eleanor what was taken from her: presence, gratitude, and living memory. In the middle of the event, while receiving a tight hug from one of the foundation's first fellows, I felt a different presence in the background. I looked up, and there he was, Kyle, leaning against a tree, half hidden, half exposed, alone. Rumpled shirt, faded jeans, no sign of arrogance, just tiredness. He didn't smile. He didn't even wave. But he didn't go away either. He stood there, as if he knew he no longer belonged to the center of history, but still felt something for her. I didn't get closer. Neither did he. It was as if we both knew that this was not our moment. It was hers, Eleanor. Shortly after, Patricia, my sister-in-law, approached. She has always been practical, direct. But that day, teary-eyed and choked, he said quietly, "You saved her memory, Richard." He saved with a greatness that few would have. I just nodded. There was nothing to answer. Just feel. As the event drew to a close and people were dispersing, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the daisy. I walked to the small flower bed next to the main entrance. I crouched down slowly and buried her with my fingers. It was a simple flower, but now it carried more history than any trophy. The city understood, not with posters, not with inflammatory speeches, but with respect, with eyes that said, "Thank you," with silences that they recognize. And that day it was as if Eleanor herself had come back to see it all. But there was something that still needed to be said, because that same afternoon, while I was putting away the papers and collecting my memories of that day, I received an envelope, and within it, a request that I never imagined reading. That night after the ceremony, when the buzz was over and the silence returned to live with me, I sat on the porch with a glass of tea and the sound of cicadas filling the dark. I felt lightweight. It was not explosive happiness, nor forced relief. It was something else, a peace that I had not felt since Eleanor left. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't look like a tomb. It felt like home. And in that good silence, almost like a nod of fate, I remembered the invitation from Ava, that young woman from the foundation who called me Mr. Richard with the face of an elegant grandfather. She had insisted, "You have to have dinner at home with my family. I promise you will leave with a fuller heart than your stomach." I met her parents, simple, warm people, who still talk looking into the eyes. The table was plentiful, but what fed me the most was respect. They spoke of Eleanor as if they knew her. One of Ava's brothers said that thanks to the foundation's scholarship, he had stopped working in a warehouse and was now graduating in nursing. The mother cried. He hugged me as if I were a relative. And there, at that dinner without luxury, I realized there was life on this side of pain. Over the next few months, I started showing up more often at the community center. We planted daisies at the entrance and named the garden the Eleanor Bed. Children drew flowers with chalk on the sidewalk. One day they called me to teach basic gardening. I accepted, and I stayed. I also signed up for a cooking class, half at Ava's insistence, half because I wanted not to go home early. It was a group of widows and widowers from the city, with more income for life than cake. It was there that I met Grace. White hair like mine, suppressed laughter, and the look of someone who has already suffered what he had to suffer, and chose to live anyway. Her husband died in Vietnam. She told me as we cut potatoes in silence side by side, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. There was no movie romance, no overwhelming passions, but, little by little, we started to walk together after classes. Then we drank tea. Sometimes we would go to the park to read. One day she showed up with a daisy seedling. "This one is kind of weak. I thought only you could give her a decent home." And he left it on my lap, unceremoniously. I planted. With her I discovered that there is love even after grief, not as a replacement but as an expansion. With her I laughed quietly, took a deep breath and spoke little, but always truthfully. One day, sitting on the park bench, she asked me if I still felt angry. I thought for a few seconds and replied, "No, I feel choice. Today I choose where I put my time, with whom I spend my silences. That's it. This is freedom." I thought the end of life was just loss. But I realized that it was rebirth too. The end of a cycle doesn't have to be the end of the road, just a redirect. And we, even with a slower body and a more selective memory, can start over. You can, and should, choose what to keep and what to leave behind. In this new time, I no longer see Kyle as a wound. I see it as a reminder, who I was, of what Eleanor saw, and what I never accept to accept again. I still think about him, but I think without weight, no charge, with the same peace that Eleanor deserved to feel. And maybe you're feeling it right now wherever you are, but as life always has one last word, the morning after one of those quiet dinners with Ava's family, I received another envelope, this time, handwritten, and what was inside. I would change everything again. On that Sunday morning the sky was clear, and the cold cut lightly like a memory. I walked to the riverside cemetery with a small bouquet of fresh daisies in my hands. It was already routine but never mechanical. Every step to Eleanor's grave carried silence, but also words that only she would understand. I arranged the vase next to the tombstone, removed some dry leaves around it, and stayed there. I didn't say anything out loud, but inside I said everything. I told them about the children at the center, Grace, the pie recipe that I finally got right. I told her that I fulfilled what she always dreamed of. I made our story count. Then I took a deep breath, touched the cold stone as if touching a memory, and left. On the way back, I stopped at the Morning Glory Diner, the usual one. I ordered my black coffee, as she liked it. While waiting, I noticed behind the counter, Kyle was there, thin, in a stained uniform, washing dishes. We looked at each other. He hesitated. He came slowly, his eyes sunken, his voice weak. "I'm sorry, Dad." I just looked at him, and he said what was needed. The flower was Daisy, and you never asked. He lowered his head. I paid for my coffee, left a good tip for the cashier girl, who didn't even know my name, but always served me with affection, and left, with my head held high, without hatred, without haste, because I was good. I was forgotten, but now, I am free. Life has taught that true love lives in attention to detail, that knowing someone's favorite flower says more than 1,000 expensive gifts, and that who forgets the heart that created him, it also forgets about itself. I learned that sometimes justice does not need a court, nor a vengeance. Sometimes it comes in a dignified silence, in a calculated gesture, in a daisy left with care. Time does not erase everything, but it shows who was, who pretended, and who stayed. If this story touched your chest in any way, I thank you for staying with me so far, because telling this was not easy, but it was necessary. And if at any time it served as a mirror or a lap, I ask you, leave a like here. That's like a hug that reaches me on the other side of the screen. Sign up too, because here, each story is a new coffee, and we will still meet many times. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching. I want to know how far this memory has come. And it activates the bell. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. Now, don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.